I'll go with linebackers. You have Chris Borland, which is fine. I think Josie Jewell from Iowa, which is fine, and then Devin Bush, which bothers me because Ryan Shazier should be on here somewhere. Devin Bush, I think, topped out at like 104 tackles one year and then 80 the next, something like that. Ryan Shazier, as a sophomore, had, I believe, 144 tackles, or a sophomore or junior, then another 120 tackles the year before or after that. He was everywhere in the backfield. He was insanely disruptive. And to leave him off of this list for Devin Bush is crazy. And I'm not saying that as a Michigan hater, even though we've already talked about JABRIL Peppers, the most overrated player of the decade. If you want to put on an all-decade player, yes, all-purpose fine. Also overrated to win the Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year in 2016 when you had Malik Hooker doing what he was doing that year. No. And so, yeah, I'll throw Devin Bush in here as well. I don't understand it. It smacks of recency bias and what, 2013, 2012, 2011, what were those? Those years apparently didn't exist to any of these voters because this was also the same time during like Manti Te'o, and I would spend, 18, 20 hours on Twitter telling people how much better Ryan Shazier was than Te'o based on the numbers, the tackles in the backfield, the disruption. I was going through box scores looking at when Te'o was making his tackles compared to when Shazier was making his tackles. Shazier was making his tackles within 3 yards of the line of scrimmage or behind it, and Te'o was 8 yards and past that. I was PFF before PFF because I was fired up about Ryan Shazier deserves more credit than he got then, and more credit than he got now from these guys.
Well, they went on the road to Wisconsin and Penn State, and as my memory serves, he basically single-handedly won both those games. I think he had a pick six maybe against Penn State in a close game, and then had the goal line stand, and I think he forced a fumble on the goal line stand with Monty or whatever. Monty, let's make a deal ball. So, a funny story now. Where was Shazier from? Was he from Plantation, Florida? Does that sound right?
Yeah, I think so. Somewhere there in Florida.
Yeah. And so didn't he come to Ohio State because he wasn't the biggest Urban Meyer guy? And then like a year into his time at Ohio State, they hired Urban Meyer, and they got along famously. Everything was great. But do you recall that, Tony? Was that part of his story that maybe he wasn't as enamored?
Right.
Meyer's a great recruiter, but there were certain kids who just didn't take to kind of his abrasive, brusque, matter of fact is probably the way you'd put it. Maybe not as, I think he could be personable once he got to know a kid, but I think it was not something that was maybe easy for him. So I don't know what it was, but that I vaguely recall that he wasn't necessarily sold on Meyer, and that it was Ohio State and Florida for him, I think. And he picks Ohio State to kind of go away from Meyer, and then he gets saddled with him as his head coach. But it all turned out for the good, and he had a great NFL career, obviously, until he got hurt.
Devin Bush's best season. So you went through the tackle numbers, the total tackle numbers, but then you started to talk about disruptive plays. Devin Bush's best season, 10 tackles for loss. Ryan Shazier, 23.5. Shazier had 45 tackles for loss in his career. Devin Bush, 18. More sacks, played on better teams. Yeah. Watch the games. That's another thing. You got to watch the games.
I'm going to need to speak to a manager after this, okay?
Devin Bush is the same principle as Peppers, national top 20 prospect coming out of high school and gets tagged as the next big thing. And then as long as he just starts games and plays in games and they hear his name called a couple times, they think, oh, he lived up to the hype. Well, he was good, but.
Yeah, JABRIL Peppers is a really good player, but.
Very good.
Very good player, but I remember the game in Columbus. It was probably his last game before he sat out the bowl game, actually, the Orange Bowl that year. He made a pick. Would that have been the year? He played 2014 through 16. Yeah, the epic overtime game. He had an interception that was deflected right to him. Any one of the three of us could have caught the football. It was deflected right to him. And they said, this is JABRIL Peppers' first career interception. Now, we just outlined Antoine Winfield not making a pick, but different circumstances. They didn't throw at him. He's making tackles all over JABRIL Peppers is playing safety. He's in the traffic. He's not making plays that change games. He's good, very good player, tremendous athlete.
Kind of Ohio State fans
or Charles Woodson. I'm sorry, Tony. Go ahead.
Ohio State fans were all over Peppers that year for not having an interception, and I remember tweeting at some point in like October, like, you Buckeye fans are guaranteeing that Jabril Peppers is going to have his first career interception against Ohio State with the way you are telling him that he's never had an interception. And like you said, it was tipped right to him. He had no choice but to catch it. The receiver was like 2 or 3 yards in front of him, so he would have given up the catch if it hadn't been tipped. So he was a fine player. But the funny thing is, you look the next year when he was replaced by KHALEKE Hudson. Hudson had better numbers in 2017 than Peppers did in 2016, but Peppers, for some reason, was the defensive player of the year based on that. Hudson had more tackles for loss, I think more overall tackles, 1 or 2 interceptions, and we know Peppers only had 1. It's just funny to me the way that hype just clouds everything when for some of these for so many professionals in this business.
He had a solid season, 66 tackles, but guys are racking up 100 tackles, had 13 tackles for loss. I'm sure that was top 5 in the league, 1 pick, 3 sacks. And then you guys said it all about Zeke, and there nothing else needs to be said, but I just have to. Yeah, you can go. It would be one thing if Saquon Barkley ran for 2,000 yards, Zeke ran for 1,000 yards, and then Zeke went on the tear against the good teams in the important games, and then you could say, "Wow, we got to weigh this out: the guy that's the producer versus the guy that's half the producer, but did it when the money was on the line." But Zeke did both. He outgained him. And then you got to put context to these numbers. He puts a historic run on those 3 teams to lift a team to the first college football playoff championship. It's just, it seems like it shouldn't even be a discussion.
I have been ignoring this whole thing until today, for this show. And now I'm just getting angrier and angrier about it. I'm gonna have to write about it just to, for some catharsis.